This is Heritage Words, a podcast about the words we've inherited from our ancestors and the meaning they bring to our lives. Heritage Words is produced by the HUC Jewish Language Project, which raises awareness about Jewish ancestral diversity through the lens of language. I'm your host, Sarah Bunin-Benor. Our guest today is Samantha Ellis. Samantha is the daughter of Iraqi Jewish refugees and author of the memoir Always Carry Salt, which was published in the UK as Chopping Onions on My Heart. And this is a memoir about losing her mother tongue, Judeo-Iraqi Arabic. It was shortlisted for the Wingate Award, and you have to read it. It's really good. Her other books include How to Be a Heroine, and her plays for theater include How to Date a Feminist and Operation Magic Carpet. Samantha, welcome to Heritage Words.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
So I highly recommend your book to everyone, and I'm so glad to have this opportunity to talk about your book. But I want to just start by asking you to tell us, and this is partly in your book, but to tell us about your ancestral migrations.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yes, my parents were both born in Baghdad. And they left in 1951. My father, he left in the mass migration of Iraqi Jews and went to Israel in the airlift. He was 11, and my mother was born in 1951, and she stayed in Iraq till 1971. So she was one of the later migrations. And She came straight to the UK. So that was quite different. They had quite different experiences of it. And they met in London. And when they first met, my father's Arabic was quite rusty because he'd been in Israel all that time and he was speaking Hebrew. Um, and, you know, that was the language at home. That was what they spoke at home.
So was it your first language then?
No, sadly, they decided not to pass it on. I think there were lots of reasons. I mean, it was the 70s. They were told it will confuse her, it will confuse the children, was one thing, which is I know is not what it's frustrating because I know as a mum now that's not what we get told. Apparently, it's amazing for your brain to learn lots of languages, but that wasn't the orthodoxy then. Um, there was also they wanted to assimilate, but there was also this feeling of what's the point? It's a dying language. We knew there were not going to be Jews in Iraq again, probably. By the time I was born in 75, we were talking, I don't know, 4 or 5 thousand Jews in Iraq maximum, hardly any. And that number was just going down day by day. So it just didn't seem like there was ever going to be a future for it. And the diaspora was so scattered. So no, but it was the language that I heard all the time at home. And when I got to about 9 years old, I could understand it. I've never really spoken it.
So when you learned it, it was just from hearing them talk to each other rather than talk to you, right?
Yes, yeah, and I kept it secret that I understood for about a year because it was so useful, as a 9-year-old to be able to kind of work out that they were, what they were planning, and because they was almost like a secret language between my parents. And then my dad made a joke, which I can't even remember, but I laughed at this joke, and they suddenly went, "Oh, she understands." That was quite a funny moment. Yeah.
And then after that, did they start to speak it to you more?
Not really. I mean, everyone was fluent in English in my family, and my mother had gone to the American school in Baghdad, so her English was particularly good. My father had lived in the UK for about 10 years before I was born, maybe a bit longer. Um, so his English was very good, and I don't know, they spoke to each other though. I mean, it was the language spoken sort of above my head as a child, and then I got older. So I was often they would speak in it and we would reply in English, the children.
Hmm.
So
Okay, but when they spoke to you in English, they also used a bunch of Arabic words. Is that right?
yes, they did. And they were definitely there were some things that were only said in Arabic, I think, and that we knew as isolated phrases. And we all I mean I had a sort of party trick when I was little where I don't know, I was 4 or 5 or something, and I was taught to say this phrase. My accent, I'm going to just say, is terrible because of this whole not learning it thing. So any Arabic speakers listening to this, you can wince at the accent, but I'll do my best. But I was taught to say ذنب الكلب حلوة بالكسبة وأقربين يوم تلوى وبعد مع Aruja, which means you can put the curly tail of the dog inside a sugarcane tube for 40 days and 40 nights, and when you take it out, it will still be curly. So it's a leopard never changes its spots, but it just takes very long time to say. And I was taught to say that when I was quite little, and I was very proud of myself, go around and say this.
That was your party trick.
That was my part.
Okay, but let's talk about the words that were used in your home, even when you were speaking in English. So you write about a lot of these in your memoir, and let's start with some of the terms of endearment that you heard.
Oh, so yeah, so Fudwa, which means I would die for you, that was a lot. I mean, this is so, I always found this so dramatic, that in a sort of 5-minute conversation about yogurt, my grandma would sort of offer to die for me 5 or 6 times. It was just this, there was such a level of sort of intensity. Abdalik, which means may I be your sacrifice, that comes from the Orthodox Jewish tradition of, on Yom Kippur of transferring your sins to a chicken. So can I take on the blame for whatever the guilt? Um, I think that yeah, a uni, my eyes, which is lovely. I still like that. Yeah, that's probably my favorite one. That's the one that if people use it, I feel really, moved. Um, and yeah, those are the main ones, the terms of endearment, I think.
Mhm. And then you also talk about some kinship terms, some terms for aunts and uncles and cousins that were more specific than that. So were those used in your home as well?
Yes, I realized. So I studied, when I was writing the memoir about losing the language, I realized that it was actually being taught at the Oxford School of Rare Jewish Languages on Zoom, by a Safbar Moshe whose family also came out of Baghdad and around about the same time as my mother, so in the 70s. So I joined this class and I suddenly realized why I had always had trouble understanding who anyone was talking about, because we don't say cousin. I'm not going to be able to tell you the Arabic words for these, but we don't say cousin. We say the male child of your brother, or the female child of your brother, or sorry, that would be niece and nephew. But we're very specific about the gender and which side it's from. So I'm not referring generally to cousins or to nieces and nephews. It's my brother's male or female child, or if I had a sister, her male or female child, and so on. So it's very, very specific. And so there's so many terms, and I realized this was why I found it so super confusing you know, to know what it was always, although it was more specific, there were just too many terms, and I never really got to grips with them.
Hmm. And so, but you don't have specific words that you remember for those categories.
I would really have to reach for them, but yeah, I mean, not that I could tell you now, no.
Yeah. So then what about words for insults or curses or negative emotion? Did that come up at all in your home?
Yes, I did. And actually, one thing that lots of people, Iraqis who've read my book, said I didn't put enough of the curses in. And there are quite a lot of them. I was actually keen not to put too many, partly because I didn't know that many, because my parents are both quite polite and they didn't really use them as much. Although I do know some of them, it wasn't as big a part of my life as it is in some people. But also, I feel like often it's a way of making these languages seem more colourful and more sort of ancient and more sort of, I don't know, less sophisticated when we really focus on the curses. And I was just, I don't know, I just felt that wasn't the entirety. I mean, someone told me that in Israel you can even get a card game with all the curses on it, in Iraqi, in Judeo-Iraqi Arabic, and I don't know, I just didn't fuck. But there are some. So Ubin Kelb, son of a dog. If you want to really go for it, it's Kelb Ubin Kelb's dog, son of a dog. Zmal is donkey. Waka Mazalim is may your luck run out. Um, if you want to call someone silly, Boomer is owl. I think those are, Skitty Uhaliha, shut up and leave it. Which is I quite like that one. Yeah, so there were quite a few of these. We are Bell means it literally oh grieving. but it's sort of, it's a shock. It's a sense of shock. I think those are the main ones. Yeah.
And did your parents use any terms from Judeo-Iraqi Arabic for body parts and other euphemisms?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. Not that I can remember. No, I'm sure they do, but sorry, no.
No, that's okay. And then a very big part of your book is food.
Mhm.
And it seems that in your understanding, food and language are very closely connected, not just having words for the foods, but also using food as metaphor. And we'll get to metaphors in a few minutes. But tell us about some of the food words that are still part of your life.
Yes, so I was always told Taki kana kubba bathumma, which means she talks like she has kubba in her mouth. So obviously my mouth's stuffed with kind of meat and bulgur wheat, it's not going to be a great conversation. And that is how bad my accent is, so that's quite nice. But we did make a lot. We do make a lot of kubba. If someone cooks, you say ashdidak, long live your hands, and they reply awafi, sort of eat it in health, which I always really love. Um, and yeah, I mean, there are some ingredients that I like if I'm making a shopping list and I want to put cumin on the list, I think cumin, which is how we would say it. I don't ever think cumin. I don't know. So that's one of those things that I think in, I don't think very much in Arabic, but that is one of them because I guess I just heard that on the list. And yeah, one alternate title for the book that I didn't go for was Iyam or Babanjan, which means days of the aubergines or eggplants, I guess, for American people listening to this. Which is it's a phrase that I always had trouble with. People would say you're living in the days of the aubergines. Iyam or Babanjan is days of the aubergines or days of the eggplants, and I never understood it. What are these days? What does it mean? I mean, it used to mean you're crazy. It was used to mean you're crazy. When are they? I found the whole thing completely bewildering. I sort of loved the phrase, but I didn't get it. And then I was told, well, the aubergines come out in the summer. It's very hot. People go crazy in the heat. And that's why. And I sort of, read up on this and, whether or not it's true that but people go crazy in the heat, there's quite a lot of myth making or storytelling around the idea that Baghdad gets so hot that people go crazy. Like there are stories that there was a um, a hospital which has a wing specifically for people who lost their minds in the summer, and they would be, put in this wing of this hospital. And September the 1st, they all get released again, and they live their lives through the winter, and then round about July, back they go in again. And I mean, this may or may not be true, but there's all these stories around it. Um, and then I asked Asaf Barmoshe, I asked him about this, and he said he thought it was more you've got a hot temper rather than you're crazy. So it's quite a bit ruder, a bit less polite, or differently impolite, I guess. Um, and I went to my grandmother who was 94 at the time, and I said, "Oh, I've got this, I've been speaking, and I've got this different definition." Um, and she said, "Oh, how old is this man?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I haven't asked him. He's teaching me. He's teaching me the language. I mean, I'm not going to ask him." And she said, "Let me see him. Let me see him." And I sort of showed her a picture from from his website. And she said, "Oh, he doesn't remember what it was like. She has no idea. He has no idea what it was like before we got air conditioning. People really did go crazy." And I just thought this was quite funny. Um, so yeah, that was a possible title for the book, which we didn't go for because of the emoji. We thought it might lead people in the wrong direction.
Oh yes, we had a an interesting conversation about that, and we're actually making a fun fact about that phrase.
Are
And
you?
the debate was, should we use the eggplant image or not? I don't
I
know. We'll
mean, it's
see.
tricky. I mean, I also kind of think, well, we should just be able to use our phrases, but it has been turned into that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so another food that you write about is amba. Tell us
Yes.
about amba and the story of its origin.
Oh well, this was a real journey for me. Amba is mango pickle. It's not chutney, it's pickle. It's very kind of it's the Iraqi Jewish pickle. It's I suppose it's our umami. We use it with everything. I always have at least one jar in the fridge. It's so good. It's very kind of sour, very tangy. And I've got to say, I always give it to my friends, but a lot of people who are not Iraqi Jews, it's very alien flavor they find it. Let's say some do embrace it, but I always thought this was the Iraqi Jewish flavor. And the story goes that it was invented by David Sassoon, who was the head of the Sassoon family, who they were the Rothschilds of the East, apparently. And the story goes that he went to India and in the 1800s, and he encountered Indian mangoes for the first time. He was so stunned by this flavor that he wanted to give it to his friends back home. He wanted to share it, but obviously it wouldn't survive being transported back to Baghdad. So he had the idea of pickling it. And again, he's when he pickled it, he was using spices and flavors that he was seeing around him in India. It's almost certainly not true that he himself invented it because, this is a father of 14 with an international business empire. And I don't know, maybe in the evenings he would sit in his kitchen and pickle away. I don't know. But it was probably there was a big Iraqi Jewish satellite community in India. And they would trade back and forth with Basra, and they often would go back to Basra or Baghdad to find wives and husbands for their children. So it was and they all spoke Judeo-Iraqi Arabic, even though they also would speak local languages as well wherever they were. So there was one of those communities in India, and there was another one in Singapore. There were a few. Anyway, so it was almost certainly invented by one of them. And I was sort of fascinated as well to discover that David Sassoon's, I think his great grandson was Siegfried Sassoon, the war poet, who I hadn't even known was Jewish, actually. I mean, I I fell in love with his poetry when I was a teenager, and I thought he almost looks like a kind of figure from Room with a View or something, in these pictures. But he had this Iraqi Jewish ancestry. And as I sort of delved deeper into his story, I realized that he probably never even, well, he probably never tasted umber. Um, by the time it got to him, his family was so disconnected from their roots. His father had been the first in his family to marry a non-Jew in the UK. And he'd been brought up so assimilated. The father, he'd sort of been, he'd been brought up hunting and shooting and fishing and, living in the countryside. And, he hadn't really, he'd become very un-Iraqi. And Siegfried himself, had no real sense of where he came from. So he probably never tasted it. And I felt this was this terrible story whereby culture could just be lost, like in one or two generations. Um, but I've also had this terrible anxiety about fusion food and authenticity. I think it's very, we call it in the UK second generation. I think you say first generation, but the generation after the people who leave, there's this anxiety that we're not authentic. We're not really Iraqi Jewish. We're not, I've never been to Baghdad. I only know about it from stories. My nostalgia is one step removed. I mean, is it even real? Can you even be nostalgic for somewhere you haven't been? So I always, when I was cooking, I was super anxious. I was trying to kind of, I'd almost cook with, my phone in my hand, just checking with my mom exactly how much turmeric are we putting in here, and super nervous. And then as I realized that amba itself was um was created outside Iraq. It is a fusion food. It was created by a homesick Iraqi Jew in India out of his encounter with the local fruit and spices, and but it was authentic to him. And then it went back to Iraq and it was authentic to the Iraqi Jews. It was one of the foods that they ate. And it's gone with Iraqi Jews everywhere we have been. It was that there are loads of stories of Iraqi Jews in Israel in the 50s being kind of laughed at because they smelled of amba. Amba itself is not a Judeo-Iraqi Arabic word. It's a I don't know, I think it's Marathi word. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. But it's not even Arabic. So I was sort of going, oh my goodness. But actually this gave me quite a lot of confidence because I thought, well, we carry our culture with us and we change it. And, I have to be able to use more or less turmeric than my mother did if I want to. She uses more or less than, generations before her. We have to be able to own our heritage and play with it. We can't be, preserving things in aspic and never, imprisoning ourselves. We have to be able to be free and adventurous. We have to be able to taste a mango and think, oh, what can I do with this? How can I make this Iraqi if I want to? Um, yeah.
That is so beautiful and such an apt metaphor for cultural contact because, yes, Amba is a story of migration and preservation, right? It was pickled so that it could be maintained uh, for weeks on that journey from India to Iraq, right?
Yes.
But it also highlights that authenticity is socially constructed. It's what we think is, what we think is authentic might not be authentic to somebody else. And this really highlights the fact that you can't be authentic in cooking
Mm.
in a new country where you're not going to have exactly the same ingredients and the conditions are different and so it may never be exactly authentic, right? And that is also the case for language. So how do you
Yes.
think that concept of amba relates to language?
I suppose I've got two things I think about this. First of all, well, actually, I've got another thing I think. Sorry. Well, one thing I would say is that the Jews who left Iraq and went to India, they ended up speaking quite an archaic form of our language. And even I remember in the 70s and 80s in London, hearing people speak it and realizing it was different and being told it was because they had come via their families had been in India for a century or so. So it was almost like speaking to someone from Victorian Britain in English. It was always slightly different. But obviously that was authentic to them, and their language had developed in a different way to the people who stayed in Iraq, even though there was back and forth. Um, I also we one of the foods that we always have is we call it makbuz. A lot of people call it baba batama. It's sort of date pastry biscuit sort of thing. And when my son, who's now 9, but when he was little, he couldn't say it. So instead of makbuz, which means baked, he would say matabooz. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is how a language dies. He's got to say the kh. Actually, he's now great at saying the kh, better than me. But actually, there was a long period where we all called it mataboos because, as you do when a kid starts developing their own, you say the word back to them. And we, and I thought, well, this is sort of how a language evolves as well. I mean, at some point it might have been called something else. So although he can now say it, I think we have to be a little bit flexible. It was quite fun when he was saying, and he was so proud that he could say the words, even not correctly. Um, but I also had a lot. I got a lot of comfort from reading Language City by Ross Perlin, which there's a whole chapter on Yiddish, but it also has a lot of mention of other Jewish languages, which I just found so inclusive and wonderful. And he's writing a lot about preserving and reviving endangered languages. It's a very positive book. It's not kind of, fixated on last speakers and last words and, the tragic losses. It's always looking forward. And he had this idea that even if you can't be a speaker of a language, you can be a keeper. And I'm quite bad. It turns out I'm quite bad at learning languages. I have attempted to learn it, properly as an adult, and I mean, I'm still trying, but I'm not doing very well. I should be honest about that. But maybe I can be a keeper. I've recorded a lot of the phrases. I record more as people tell me them. People send me word lists now as a result of my book, and I write them all down. Maybe that's also a role, and that felt more doable.
Absolutely. You're certainly not just a keeper, but also an educator. You're teaching the world about the existence of Judeo-Iraqi Arabic. And I mean, just the fact that your book is filled with so many phrases that highlights the richness of the language is a real contribution to the world.
Thank you. That's so nice to hear. Thank you.
So in that part where you're talking about your sons calling Mahbus Matabus, you have a quote where you say he might have been mispronouncing Judeo-Iraqi Arabic, but at least he was speaking it.
Yes.
And I think that's exactly right. And in terms of when we think about the authenticity of a language and that amba metaphor, it is always language is always changing. And
Mm,
in a migrant context, it's pretty unusual for families to maintain an immigrant language after two generations. And so
mhm,
it's almost inevitable that these languages are going to shift, that the families will not use those languages anymore. But we have a great opportunity to maintain heritage words, the words that we've inherited from our ancestors who spoke that language, even after that language is no longer spoken in our family. And I think your book is filled with heritage words. And I'm wondering, aside from the word mahbus, what are some other heritage words that you think your son is able to use and does use?
okay, so I think he knows how to say "how are you," which is echelonic, which I love. It literally means "what color are you?" And I there's a folk etymology which might not be accurate, but I kind of love it anyway, so I'll tell you anyway. I'm sure at some point we will learn this is inaccurate, but for now, this is the story we have, which was that there was a plague or some kind of illness which sort of changed the kind of temporarily made you either very green or very pale or whatever it was, changed the color of your skin or the sort of, shade of you. And so asking Eshlonik was literally, have you had the plague? Have you are you recovered? Are you okay? And so that's where it came from. Possibly, possibly. But I sort of love that. I think he knows Eshtidik, which we already talked about. Long live your hands. He has called me Fudwa, which he's not really supposed to do. It's supposed to go from a parent to a child. Yesterday he called my mother Fudwa, which I thought was very sweet. Even though we all went, you're not supposed to do that. He doesn't know this yet, but there is a song that is sung by the mother of the groom at the henna party before the wedding, which I hope, if he does marry one day, that I might sing for him if he lets me, which is called Afaki, and it means bravo to you, but it's very sarcastic, and you sing it to the mother of the bride. So it's the mother of the groom singing it to the mother of the bride, and it's. Bravo to you. Well done. You did nothing. Here I am. I wore myself to the bone, bringing him up, exhausted myself, tired myself, labored, did everything. And now you get him ready made and you just take him. And then there's all these. So it's very funny. And I suppose it's sort of, I quite like the way it sort of vents all the anxieties around, an engagement and a wedding, blending families and all of that. And Sarah Manasseh, who's a brilliant Iraqi Jewish Indian scholar of music, and she's based in the UK. She's found all the other loads of other verses, and they're hilarious. I mean, one of them is like, "You put your daughter by the side of the road, and you fanned out her hair, and tempted my son." All this stuff. Anyway, it's quite funny. So I hope he will know that one. I hope I'm going to sort of, be able to sing that one. There was one point. There's one point when he was little, when I found myself speaking it without meaning to, which was a sort of joyous moment for me, although it came out of a sort of stressful time. He was in his high chair and, I don't know, screaming, throwing food on the floor, whatever kids, toddlers do, drive me mad. And I just found myself saying, Tash Mahi, which means my head is exploding. And his dad doesn't speak any Judeo-Iraqi Arabic. He was three, and I mean, both of them just looked at me. Like it was like, what? And we also just looked at each other. And it was quite funny because it had just come out of my mouth. And I was like half, oh, he's gone quiet, that's great. And half of me was going, oh, I've shouted, oh, that's not great. And then another part of me was going, oh, I'm speaking. It was really exciting. So that's one I'm sure my mother's definitely said that to him, and I'm sure he will learn that. I think he knows. Mishmish, which was my nickname as a child, which a lot of Iraqi families have a mishmish. It means little apricot. Um, I'm trying to think what else. I think he knows. Oh, I'm not sure if he knows any of the others. He knows a lot of the food words. He knows that the chicken and rice dish is tabit. Um, he knows kubba. He knows which kubba he likes. He knows kubba shwanda, which is the one with the beetroot. Sort of and the kubba themselves go sort of ruby red. Some of the kids used to call it red kubba, but he calls it kubba shwanda, the proper name, which I'm quite pleased about. It's quite sweet. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, but I suppose I need to introduce more things as I go along.
Does he have any Iraqi Jewish friends?
Um, no, he's met some. I mean, we have cousins and stuff. No, but maybe he will grow it later.
So it seems from your book that you didn't really grow up in an Iraqi Jewish community beyond your family, or did you? Were there when you were growing up, did you have other friends who were children of immigrants from Iraq?
Yes, very much so. There's a very tight-knit Iraqi Jewish community in London, and I grew up in it. And in fact, I mean, the reason I didn't interview, I was very keen in the book to just because the story of the Iraqi Jews is so what's the word? It's been manipulated, it's been misused a lot of times. A lot of people want it to mean different things. And I just thought, and also everyone who left at different times has a different feeling about Iraq. And I thought the best thing I could do is just stick to interviewing just my own family, just a few people. So, and I realized that because my grandmother had lived through the Farhud, well, it's the sort of pogrom of 1941, but my grandma's cousin, who was a historian, she always said, why use the word pogrom? You know, we have our own word, Farhud, which means the breakdown of order. So she lived through the Farhud when she was 11 in 1941, and then my father had left in the mass airlift in 51, and then my mother had stayed till 71. So I felt I had this kind of sweep of history that I could tell just through those three people. But yes, I grew up, I had so much Judeo-Iraqi Arabic when I was little that I thought English was just a sort of silly language for sort of nursery school and picture books. I was quite shocked to see sort of adults speaking it in a serious way when I got to school. I just thought, I don't know, I just thought it was a kind of kids' language, and when I grew up, I would speak the real language. It was quite a surprise to me that there were grown-ups who thought it was worth speaking.
But then you do talk about going to school and how your friends at school were not Iraqi Jews, and you got nervous about or insecure about having your lunches that your mom would pack, and so
Yeah.
instead you started eating cream cheese sandwiches,
Yeah.
which reminded me of the scene from My Big Fat Greek Wedding, where
Yes.
she, you know what I'm talking about, the
I
moussaka,
do,
yeah.
I do. I mean, I kind of feel every family from a different place has probably some similar experiences. But I mean, I really regret it now. My mum used to make these amazing, these beautiful lunches. She used to go and get the special pizza from the special bakery, and then she would do we call them tabit eggs, black eggs. They're cooked in with a tabit chicken, um, and they come out sort of the white of the egg is sort of they're brown really rather than black. Beautiful. And she would make those, and so they cooked overnight, and they have the spices in them, and amba, of course, hummus, lots of salad. I mean, she used to make these amazing lunches. And yeah, at a certain point I just started having cream cheese and white bread, and I wonder if it's why I didn't grow past 5'3". I mean, genuinely, I think it was a mistake. Um, but I think going backwards and forwards about your culture is probably um, is probably part of the journey. I had an Ashkenazi boyfriend when I was a teenager, who asked me why my parents were speaking the language of the enemy. And I remember saying, but some of your family speak Yiddish. I mean, we all speak languages of places our families have come from, not always in the, you know, most joyous of circumstances, but they were, I had things like that to navigate as well, I guess, which I suppose we all do.
Yeah. And then what about now? Do you have a community of Iraqi Jews that you interact with now? Do you attend an Iraqi Jewish synagogue?
Synagogue, not really. I mean, not really, but I mean, I have done. I'm not very religious, but I do occasionally go to synagogue, and I go to a Sephardi one. Um, I do have. Yeah, I've sort of. Yeah, I have an Iraqi Jewish friendship group, and I'm very close to my cousins as well and my brother. Um, but I'd say all of our children don't speak. But sometimes we'll use a few words here and there, and that's quite nice for the kids to hear, I think. Um,
And so also you mentioned a few Ashkenazi things in the book, like you talk about making hamantaschen, for example. Is that based on interactions with Ashkenazi friends or yeah, tell us about that.
yeah, I mean, I suppose, I mean, the Iraqi Jewish community in London is very small, and in fact, the Jewish community in London, I mean, it's much smaller than in the US. So, in general, and so, but again, we have this sort of almost default Ashkenazi sort of situation, and yeah, I mean, we make challah, we make hamantash, and these were not foods that we had. At Purim in Iraq. Purim in Iraq was apparently the big festival. I mean, the biggest, the most important of the year, the most fun. And the one of the things they used to make was zangula, which was the sort of squiggles. Nigella Lawson put a recipe for them in her book, and she describes them as fried dough squiggles, which I think is the sort of best explanation. And then you dip them in syrup with, some people use rose water or orange flower water. Oh, I can't hear you.
When you said Zangula, yeah, then you said squiggle. So start there.
Oh, um, so Purim, one of the foods we would make is zangula, which Nigella Lawson put them in her book, and she just defined them as fried dough squiggles, which I think is pretty good. And then you dip them straight out the frying pan into syrup, usually with either rose water or orange flower water, and they're really good. So ours tradition is quite different, and I do make both, but now my son has had Hamantash and he likes to have that as well. And I think it's also important to connect with where you are, and to what everyone else is doing, I guess. So yeah, certainly. But I feel very strongly that speakers of all the endangered Jewish languages should. It would be so nice if we were all sort of working together. It feels sometimes as though there's this division between Ashkenazi and Sephardi, or Ladino and the Arabic languages, and so on. And we're all sort of in maybe not the same boat, but we that we're all sort of facing a similar struggle. And I love that. I love that the Jewish Language Project works. It's amazing to me seeing those lists that you have of all the languages and not one and then the other. So again, I mean, I think, I'm happy to do the odd thing that isn't Iraqi Jewish, but is a way of connecting with where I am.
Absolutely. And I think that's true in Jewish communities around the world that there is mutual influence from
Mm.
multiple immigrant streams.
Yes.
And I think we should embrace that, including with heritage words. So
Mm.
I'm trying to raise awareness about the word ashdidek, the phrase
Yeah.
ashdidek, and we actually make stickers and mugs and aprons
Yeah.
with ashdidek on it.
It's
And
fantastic.
I'm wondering what you think about that, about trying to infuse some Iraqi Jewish content into um, communities beyond Iraqi Jews.
Oh, I mean, I love it. I mean, I don't think, I mean, British English isn't as inflected with Yiddish as American English is. But I love how, if I'm watching American TV, you'll hear the odd bit of Yiddish, and you sort of, it's not signposted as Yiddish, it's just as part of it. I would love it if my language had that sort of reach and had that, I and I mean, one of the things I loved about studying it at the Oxford School of Rare Jewish Languages was that not everyone doing it was Iraqi Jewish. I mean, most of us were. Most of us were people like me whose parents or grandparents had left. But in the course I was on, there was someone from South Korea, and someone from Ukraine. I mean, I've got to say they were both better at it than me. Their accents were better. It was sort of a joy. But I love the idea that you could just decide, like I might decide to brush up my French this summer, they might decide to learn Judeo-Iraqi Arabic, and I thought that was just so wonderful. I love the idea that it's not this, weird niche language that only, and I mean, Ashtidik is such a beautiful phrase. I love long live your hands. I also think you can apply it to other things. You can apply it to other things, and it's usually for food. But I mean, what about saying it to someone who's painted you a beautiful picture or, made a beautiful podcast or, whatever they've done, some people who've made things, it's about thank you for making this and sharing it.
Absolutely. And Yoni Avi Batat, a singer also of Iraqi origin, has a song with
Oh, it doesn't.
the word Ashtidek. I don't think he's recorded it yet, but he performed it at a concert that we produced in Los Angeles. And it
Oh,
was he made that exact point that it's not just about after a meal, it's for anything people do with their hands and any compliment to someone creative.
yeah, yeah. I mean, why not? Absolutely.
So a minute ago, you talked about how we're all in the same boat, and that reminded me of the metaphor in your book of the ark. Tell
Yeah.
us about that metaphor and how it relates to language.
Yeah, so I mean, I suppose my starting point was really my son was 2.5, 2.5, yeah, and I was in a playground in London and I got talking to this other mother and she was speaking to her son partly in French and partly in English. And I said, oh, do you go to there's a nursery near us, a kindergarten that is bilingual French and English. And when I had looked at it because I was interested in my son being bilingual, and however we went about that. Um, I said, "Oh, do you go to that nursery?" And she sort of said, "Oh, but you're not French." And I said, "No, no." She said, "Well, why don't you go to a bilingual nursery for your language?" And I found myself saying, "Because my language is dead." And I don't know, the words, I mean, actually, it's dying, it's not dead, but the word "my language is dead" came out of my mouth. And as those words came out of my mouth, I think I felt it for the first time. I felt this huge sense of shock. I bundled my son up in the pushchair. I left. I was sobbing. I mean, it was a very dramatic kind of moment of realization. And I had this feeling a flood is coming and I need to build an ark. And I think it was this idea of, I've always been fascinated by the idea of Noah. His world is being destroyed and he loads what he can onto this wooden boat and tries to save it. And, in some versions of the story, he's not just taking the animals two by two. I think there's a Mesopotamian version where he brings one master of each craft. So, he's bringing a brick builder and a kind of, a potter and, whatever the expertises that are going to be that he's going to need. So taking knowledge with him as well. I mean, there are all these different versions, and then the idea that he would have, I mean, I find it so devastating when I think about it that well, that all of them all his family would have seen the waters rising, people drowning, their world being destroyed, and then suddenly they're on this kind of open water, not knowing. I mean, they have to trust that they're going to hit dry land at some point, but they don't, there's no guarantee really. They've just been told they will. Um, and what do you take? What do you take with you? And this also um, always felt like connected to my family. The Jews who left in 1951 were allowed to take one suitcase and I think 50 dinar. And then my mother's family who left later, they left on a commercial flight. So they had a sort of luggage allowance, like you would if you were going on holiday. Again, not masses, but more than that. And so the question is of what would you take? What would you save? Always really, I find really gets me. Um, so I had this idea of what would I save of the language, or can you save it, or what can be carried over the seas to the new land? And then I don't know. I mean, as I say, I'm not religious, but I found the story of Noah has really always been with me somehow. Um, he always gets mocked for we get to the other side. First thing he does, plant a vineyard so he can get drunk. And I mean, I can see why we all laugh at him, but I mean, and on one level, I mean, wouldn't you want to get drunk after all of that? I would certainly plant a couple of vineyards, straight away. But what I'm interested in is the first thing he does is he plants. So he almost his instinct is to kind of plunge his hands into the soil and root himself. And I was very interested in this idea of how do you root yourself in a foreign place, in a new place. How do you get down deep into the earth and become part of it, with whatever you've managed to take in your suitcase? I find it really uh, devastating and powerful. And I kept thinking with the language, I mean, your title, Heritage Words, is so beautiful because this idea that there are some words, maybe we won't keep the whole language, but maybe there will be some words or some phrases or a sense of its I don't know, vibe, its energy, its its viscerality, its color, its noise. I don't know.
Absolutely. And heritage words allow us to bring a little bit of the past into the present. You
Yeah.
write about that in your chapter that focuses on trauma, and you say that you don't want to pass on to your children, quote, the unwanted flashbacks, the feeling of the past intruding into the present, the inability to draw a line between there and then and here and now. But that's exactly what heritage words are. They bring a little bit of the then and there into the here and now. And like Yoni Avi Batat says in his song, From the Fragments, he says, I'm singing my own song. That he has the songs of his ancestors, but then he brings elements of those songs into his own music and makes it his own. And his songs are multilingual,
Mhm.
but a lot of the creativity that's happening in English speaking countries today is predominantly in English, but with little influences, with an infusion from their ancestral languages and cultures.
And I think that's a chosen. I mean, that's you choosing to bring something from then into now. But I mean, one thing that, when I was first thinking about this, I ordered this book on the internet again by Asaf Moshe. We've been talking about him a lot. And he had some interviews in it with his family. I mean, it's a book about the language, but there's this bit where he has these texts and he has these interviews with his family. And I started just by sort of underlining the words I knew because I thought, let's see what I know. Um, and I realised I knew the word harb, war, junta, suitcase, passportat, which is obviously passports, which is obviously a loan word, Kacharchi, smuggler, Shurta, police, Edmornu, they executed him, Kaf, fear. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is like a sort of, it's like, I mean, why do I know these words? Why do I know the word for, these words for police and execution? I don't know these words in French, which I've studied. I, but I obviously heard them a lot. Um, those I would say are not words I necessarily. I mean, I didn't really want. I don't say the word fedwa. I would die for you to my son. I would die for him, but I feel something feels too dramatic, traumatic about that word. I didn't want to sort of parent him in that way, although I'm very moved when people say that to me, and I would die for my son, so maybe I should say it, but somehow I haven't said it to him. Um, I hope he doesn't know all of these words. But it's tricky, isn't it? It's tricky to work out what you can bring without bringing the sort of the trauma as well. But I love the idea of these multilingual songs. And being able to be free with it, it's a really, I would say it's a really playful language as well. I want to say um, it's often quite sort of, I mean, I love there's this phrase that you can use to ask people how they are, and you say "Esh aku, esh maku." It means what is there, what isn't there. I love this. Like, what is there, what isn't there? It's so kind of all encompassing. Where do you start? But it's the rhyming of it I really like. What's I going to say? We start stories. If you want to tell a story, you can. I mean, this is common to other languages as well, but we say "Kanu makan al Allah." Sorry, al Allah will to clan. It was and it was not. It's in God's hands, and I love that. I mean, I love that. Was it or was it not? You know, it's very teasing. It's this sort of rocking, rhyming, you know, this there's something very yeah, playful about it, and this idea of things being there and not being there, and you know, ambiguous. There's a room for irony and ambiguity, which I really love, you know.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're saying you can choose which heritage words you pass on to the next generation, and it doesn't have to be the ones that are filled with trauma. It can be the ones that are more about endearment and just highlighting the interesting aspects of the ancestral culture.
Yeah, I mean, maybe let's hope so. Yeah, I'd like to try try that.
So I want to wrap us up by asking you, what do you want to happen to Judeo-Iraqi Arabic?
Oh, that's such a hard question because, you know, in some level, I would say, okay, I would like there to be some magical thing whereby we would all have somewhere to go and speak it and we would all somehow be able to speak it. But I don't think that's, I don't think it is going to survive as a spoken language. I think we're really lucky to have projects like yours, to have the Oxford School for Rare Jewish Languages. Ellie Tillman has made this beautiful archive of it, which is online, which is lots. He interviewed lots and lots of people speaking it, including lots of people I know. My grandma's on there. It's a beautiful, beautiful archive, and because he speaks it, he was able just to chat to people and just get so much more out of them than, you know, I would, for example, and it was really amazing. So we have, you know, there are these things, and you know, I think it will be spoken a little bit, but I don't know. I mean, I suppose I would love for whatever can be preserved to be preserved. But yeah, I don't know. The fantasy would be that we would all be able to speak it. I actually told my son on the way to school this morning that I was recording this podcast. And he said, when are you going to write a sequel? I said, what do you mean a sequel? And he said, the sequel where I save it. And I was like, okay. So maybe that's the fantasy. That's what I would like. But I was like, you have to save it first, then I'm going to write it. I'm not going to do it
Amazing.
until you've done it. I'm not going to make it up.
How old is he now?
9. So we've got a little way to go.
Okay, well, I love that he's already thinking about his role in the future as a keeper of the language.
Yeah.
And would you want him to speak it to his kids?
Gosh. I mean, the thing about not, you know, the thing about my family not teaching it to me is who would I speak it to? But now I think, well, I suppose I could be speaking it to my cousins, my brother, you know, if we'd all learned it. That's the thing, we'd all have had to learn it with my friends. You know, there are a lot of people I could be speaking it to. So this idea I would have no one speak it to was turned out not to be true. But then if I think about my son, who would he speak it to? Well, it would take a lot of people choosing to teach it to their grandchildren at this point. And I don't know. Yeah, I
That's
don't.
true. The time before someone goes through puberty is really the best time to learn a language. So if he wants to be that superhero, evil eye guy, as he talks about in your book, then now's the time, right? And we actually at the Jewish Language Project are currently working to launch a mentor learner program. We did
Oh
a
yeah,
pilot version of it with specifically Judeo-Baghdadi Arabic
yeah.
in the summer of 2024. Yeah, the summer of 2024. And no, maybe it was 25. Yeah, 24. And we would like to launch it. And your son is exactly the kind of person that would be perfect for it, that we would match him with a native
Yeah,
speaker. And it could be his grandmother, you know, it
yeah.
could be, and
Love that. I love the idea of a mental learner, and it's wonderful that you're doing this. I'm so impressed. I love it so much.
well, thank you. And I just have one word to say about this beautiful memoir that you've written and all the wonderful work that you're doing as a language keeper, and that is Ashtidek.
Oh, thank you. I should it to you too. Thank
Thank you, Samantha Ellis.
you.
Heritage Words is a partnership of the Hebrew Union College Jewish Language Project and HUC Connect, supported by tax-deductible donations from listeners like you. I'm the producer and host, Sarah Bunin-Benor. Kyle Elba's Finger Hut is assistant producer, Avishai Artsy is editor, and Talia Ehrenberg is video editor. The music is from Maurice El Medioni's French and Algerian Arabic album Café Oran, featuring the Klezmatics David Krakauer and Frank London, courtesy of Piranha Records. This podcast is one of the many ways the Jewish Language Project raises awareness about the diversity of the Jewish people and the phenomenon of heritage words. We also have online crowdsourced dictionaries where you can find the words mentioned in each episode. Our social media posts include Music Mondays, Jewish Word of the Week, and Fun Facts. And we offer free educational materials and exhibits that you can visit online or display in a synagogue, museum, or community center. Contact us about our live tapings, study tours, and sponsorship opportunities. Looking for gifts for Shabbat dinners and Passover seders? Check out our whimsical and educational t-shirts, tote bags, posters, stickers, and aprons. You can find all this content and donate, volunteer, or sign up for our email list at jewishlanguages.org. Thank you, merci mucho, ilaha yaviloch, ashenem dank, shukran, soch boshi, toda rabah.